Hey everyone, and welcome back to another College Chaps podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk to our guest about running and holding down arguably the biggest job in college athletics and the challenges this brings. But first, as you know, with the College Chaps, I'm George. I'm joined by Ollie this week with Alex back on volleyball duty. Ollie, how are you, my friend?
Doing really well. It's Halloween as we're recording this. I'm not sure if it's going out tonight or tomorrow. It's Halloween as we're recording it, and Maction is back. The Mac is back, and I can't wait to watch a couple of great teams in action tonight. But we're not here to talk about the Mac tonight. Apparently, there's a bigger conference in college football than the Mac. I don't know who claims that, who professes that, but we're going to talk to someone who is very much involved with what is arguably the biggest conference in college football.
And I knew you'd managed to get the Mac in some way. Our guest is a native of Auburn, but New York, not Alabama, although his career has taken him from upstate New York to Louisiana to Texas to his current home in Birmingham, Alabama, where he holds down the most important job in college athletics. He's also an avid marathon runner, and if my research is correct, he has completed 41 marathons, which is quite the feat, and I'm not quite sure where he gets the time. So we're very privileged to have the opportunity to speak with the Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Commissioner Greg Sankey. Commissioner, welcome. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Good to be with you. I've been introduced to you at a distance by Laura Rutledge, who said I should listen in, and I'm highly entertained every time I hear Will Muschamp saying he's going to be fine for the rest of my life if he comments on that. So I just want you to know what brings a smile to my face.
I'm glad to. We love that clip. And coincidentally, this was not on purpose, but we had Laura as our guest last week, and that's our sixth appearance on this podcast. She's been an incredible ambassador for us. So yeah, you're in good company. As Ollie said, it's Halloween as we record this podcast. So we wanted to start off on a slightly more light-hearted note, and in the spirit of the late Coach Leach, we wanted to ask you what your favourite Halloween candy is, Commissioner.
I wish I could make it as interesting as a conversation with Mike has been about Halloween candy. If I was to pick, in fact, I do pick. And so Reese's peanut butter cups are at the top of the list. And if my wife buys them in early October, she has to go back to the store 2 or 3 times since I eat them all before it's Halloween. So I'm out of town. We'll get rid of them tonight. We'll be back on the nutritional plan when I return home tomorrow evening.
Do you? I know. Listen, I mean, we call it Halloween. You guys call it trick or treating, and I know it's a big thing in the States, but I know your two daughters are grown up now, but have traditionally you made a thing of this holiday because it's a very popular holiday in the States, isn't it?
Yeah, so we had a few traditions. My daughters now we became grandparents for the first time this year, so we have a granddaughter. My children are familiar with the candy tax, which is due to the father who accommodates them on trick or treating. So that would remove certain level of sweet tarts and Reese's peanut butter cups and Mr. Good bars if they existed in the bag. We started in Dallas. We had a group of friends. We lived north of Dallas when they were in elementary school. We moved to Birmingham. I remember the first time we trick or treated around our neighborhood being asked, "Are you for Auburn or Alabama?" So we lived outside Birmingham, but my children in in fifth grade and second grade being asked, "Are you for Auburn or Alabama?" And looking at me, since I work for the conference office, they knew they weren't supposed to pick sides and wondering, what do we do in that moment? So those are two good memories. Always had fun. Um, and it'll be cool to see them create their own traditions with their children.
Hmm.
As George mentioned, it is spooky season, and for some people, the prospect of running the largest conference in college football will be a scary proposition. What are some things that keep Greg Sankey up at night, not just at this time of year, but throughout the role of the SEC commissioner?
Well, it's changed a little bit. So this is my ninth football season. I remember when I took over from my predecessor, Mike Slive, the run of success we had at that time. There were two things I literally would wake up in the middle of the night and I would think of immediately. One was, what if we did not have a team selected to participate in the college football playoff. So that was 2015. It was the second year of the 14 playoff. The first year was the only time, I think, since like 2006, we hadn't had a team playing the national championship game. So, like, what happens if we don't even have a team picked? And they're going to look at, well, the biggest change was the commissioner, so it must be his fault. And then we played our championship game then at the Georgia Dome, which had red seats. And if they weren't full, you'd see that they were empty. So my second thought was in the middle of the night, well, what if we have empty seats? The good news is we've continued our run of success. We'll see what happens this year. We've had great championship games. Now, there's just a lot of change happening around college football in the States. Pressures around student athlete support, name, image, likeness activity, the lack of uniformity. Our states are legislating, are setting rules now, and they're not uniform. So state by state, we have differences. The oncoming expansion of the college football to 12. For us, onboarding Oklahoma and Texas, we've done a lot of work on that. So that doesn't keep me up as night so much as just the magnitude of the SEC going from 14 incredible universities and athletic programs and football teams to 16. Those occupy a great deal of my attention and time. And occasionally I wake up at like 4 a.m. and I don't go back to sleep.
Just to piggyback off that before we move on, you mentioned the college football playoff there, and the SEC has this incredible run of success where the playoff is concerned in terms of having teams in there, having them in the national championship game. It's the first college football playoff rankings announcement tonight. Are we expecting, as the SEC commissioner, do you think Georgia is going to be the number one team in the initial college football playoff rankings?
Noting my full bias, I think we should see that just based on who that team is. I would probably rank other of our teams higher given the week-to-week rigor. The note is we didn't have the week 1, week 2 success that we have become accustomed. And so that creates some perceptions. I think what's important, and we're seeing it this week as we look to the games of November 4th, we've got huge games ahead the rest of November involving some of our leading teams. It'll be fascinating to see what happens with the rankings tonight, but even more fascinating to see what happens on the next 4 Saturdays.
Yeah, all really starts here, doesn't it? I was very lucky to be in Nashville to join you all for SEC Media Days, and that was just a great and thrilling event for me. And I guess part of the job I thought I had was to talk about the kind of fandom outside of the United States, and we know and we see the expansion of the NFL outside of the US. Now, college football is very different because college football is incredibly regionalised, and that's where its beauty and its passion comes from. But I guess the question for you, college football and the SEC in particular outside of the US, we see the growing passion and fandom for it. How aware of you of that growing audience, and how important and is it on the radar of the conference itself and the teams?
A few points there. Dating back to 2016 and 2017, I was in Dublin both of those summers. That was my vacation. In both occasions, I took time in conversation, both with people in the States and people in Ireland. One time included tea with the Lord Mayor of Dublin, talking about the possibility of an SEC team or two playing in Dublin. There's some realities around the size of our stadiums and the economics of making that move. The second time I was there, I actually was eating dinner while on a conference call. I was eating that dinner in Dublin. On the conference call was 2 of our teams with Anthony Travel talking about that very possibility. It hasn't worked out. We've been attentive to what's happened with our college colleagues. So this year watching Notre Dame and Navy, and then having a little bit of a debrief with Jack Swarbrick, the Notre Dame athletics director, about how that management and the learning has helped them improve. I visited Aviva Stadium for what we call a soccer game on one of those trips, just to see the facility, and that group was great and showing me around. I went to Croke Park as well, which is kind of more our fan size. I was admittedly there to watch U2, so American football wasn't on my mind that night. And I made a couple trips to London before I was commissioner, and have paid pretty close attention. I'm a Buffalo fan, so they played in London somewhat unsuccessfully this year. But it's really fascinating to watch the crowd shots, to me, of those NFL games where you don't see like Buffalo fans or Jacksonville fans. You see jerseys from all 32 NFL teams spread throughout whatever stadium the game may be played in. I don't know if it works, but it's something that we've continued to discuss. Perhaps at some point, things will align. The right teams will have interest, whether it's two conference opponents or an SEC team versus another. But it's something that's at least an annual conversation still for us.
I mean, I think we've got Georgia Tech and Florida State coming. Yeah, Florida State coming next year. And certainly we knew that Notre Dame were going to be a popular guest coming, because they've been to Ireland a couple of times before, but Ollie was there. And you can talk more pertinently than I can, but certainly the scenes coming out of Dublin were quite incredible. And I take your point about the size of the stadium. You couldn't get a ticket for that game for love nor money, frankly.
One of my learning experiences on the second trip, so in 2017, was we had the tour of the Guinness Storehouse, which was a high point for me. And it was my wife and I, and then we had a tour guide, so just the three of us. And he was in his early 20s, and he and three buddies had already bought tickets for the Iron Bowl. So we were there in July, and they were making a trip. The game that particular year was in Auburn. And it just created this conversation over the next hour or two about his awareness of American football. Why did you pick the Iron Bowl? How did you get tickets? What are you looking forward to doing? In fact, I made a trip one time to Oman, and our tour bus driver and I had this long discussion about the Oregon-Auburn national championship game that was played in January 2011. And it just opened my eyes to the level of attention played, literally around the world, to what we do in college football, in particular in the Southeastern Conference, and has kept the wheels spinning about how might we continue to expand upon that interest.
Yeah, it's certainly in this country, and I can't speak to outside of this country and to further fields like you mentioned there, Oman. But there is a growing love for college football. It started with the rise of the NFL, and as people try to understand the NFL and how that works and the draft, then they become interested in college football, and then they've realised what a great product it is. And that's certainly what happened for me, and now that's my day job, is covering college football. But in the UK now, there's a bit of a thorny subject because we can't actually watch college football legitimately outside of Notre Dame games, a handful of Notre Dame home games. While we've got you and we've got your attention and the ability to speak to your commissioner, firstly, we wanted to know did you have any insight, or do you have any insight into any potential ongoing discussions with the ESPN and ABC to be able to show the SEC in the UK and further afield?
A couple things. One, I know everybody in the UK wants to watch Paul Feinbaum, and what would be the evening for you, probably prime time. So we need to get that fixed. I became aware of the arising issue in the early summertime after listening to your podcast, quite honestly. And that provoked some conversations about, from our side, like what's going on. I actually had several emails independent of the podcast. At least they didn't reference the podcast, of U.S. citizens, alums who are now in the UK and didn't have access to football. So that's, as I understand, a work in progress. There have been some distribution, some platform issues. We're not inattentive to it. As I understand, we don't have a full solution at this point. I know one of the things that ESPN's been really effective with is international distribution. there are about 150 countries with access points, but these things change from time to time. So I will note that we've had a level of work. I've not followed up since probably August of this year, and will commit that I owe that conversation becoming a bit more active on our part, because I do think there's a level of interest we discovered with the feedback. And I'm reminded of the first trip I made to Ireland. I'm getting out of a boat after touring 6 lakes in a jaunting cart that took me up outside Killarney, and I walked to a castle, and there were 4 LSU fans, and I had no logos on who recognized me, and I was new to the job. And then the next time I went back, I was in a pub sitting next to a South Carolina soccer player who I presented a championship trophy to, about 8 months earlier. So, I mean, that's just a small illustration, an anecdotal representation. I know there's interest, and you raising it will remind me to get that back on my priority list.
Maybe this is not a topic to be talked about on a podcast with the commissioner, but I've been astounded by the ingenuity of the UK and Ireland viewer base in terms of how they've actually managed to be able to get hold of some sort of feed. But again, perhaps this is not the right time or place to be talking about that. But I think it did raise. I mean, we put something on Twitter which gathered a lot of interest, frankly, and it just kind of, I wouldn't say it was a magnet, but certainly people migrated to what we were saying. And back in August, pre the season kicking off, it was a very emotive issue. I think for the NFL, it's obvious where the value comes from extending outside of the US. For college football, I think maybe slightly less obvious outside of maybe merchandise sales. But how important do you think a growing fan base outside of the US is for college athletics? And I guess I'll just follow that up by saying it's not just football. I think people, Alex unfortunately is not with us, but Alex is a professional volleyball coach in the UK, expanding the attraction for volleyball. Baseball, SEC baseball is huge, and basketball. I guess sports in general, how important is it to have an international fan base?
I think you identify properly the strength of our league is its regionality. And we've seen that with recent university moves into different conferences. The ones that we've added created about a 95-mile additional distance. So what would that be? About 60K or something like that. So we haven't stretched our boundaries, but we think the strength of our regional affiliation gives us a national, and I've spoken directly to an international platform. Now, to your point about the ingenuity of fans in the UK and in Ireland accessing our broadcasts, what we want is ease of access so that we draw people in. And unique to the American college scene is, we began soccer competition in mid-August, and we finished our baseball college World Series in late June. So other than about 6 weeks in July and August, we're active the whole year. How do we create interest and accessibility globally is important, because we've seen recruitment of young people, both as students and as student athletes. So as you think about the why, you want people to be able to access your games because there's interest in attending university in the United States, whether you're a student, an athlete, a graduate student. But 2 of my presidents, one's from Belgium, one's from Germany. You don't know where the next leader of our universities might come from. And so how do you think differently? The ability to touch and feel what we do, I think, is important as well. And that's why you've got South Carolina playing a women's basketball game in Paris this year. Kentucky's played Michigan in London in men's basketball. And can we build those touch points, make it economically viable, make it a rallying point for alums who may be living abroad, but also draw a little bit new audience who's heard of this but hasn't touched it or felt it. I think those are reasons that we would continue to expand our footprint, but also respect. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, a stone's throw from Neyland Stadium, where they can have 103,000 people. on Saturday for their football game. And there's a balance in there that we continue to discuss, whether it's football or some of our other sports. And you've seen some of those sports go abroad, which is a neat deal for us.
Commissioner, you talked then about expanding the boundaries of the Southeastern Conference, and obviously you welcome in Texas and Oklahoma next season. You had the opportunity to get to Red River rivalry, which for me I think is one of the greatest rivalry games in all of sports. Firstly, what did you make of that experience? And secondly, what do Texas and Oklahoma bring to the SEC from 2024 onwards?
As it relates to the game specifically, I learned, and I was reminded, because I lived in the Dallas area for 11 years, I was reminded that to buy a funnel cake, you have to first go buy coupons. And then you can go back to the stand where they sell the funnel cake and buy the actual funnel cake. And so I ran up there optimistically, ready to buy my funnel cake. And then they said I had to go buy coupons. I bought $50 worth of coupons, not really processing the economics of the funnel cake. I bought 5, which was $10 each. I think there's probably 40 cents of ingredients actually in the funnel cake itself. So there's a high profit center. And then we were in a golf cart, and so when we took off, there's powdered sugar on top of the funnel cake. It blew all over all of my sport coat, my shoes, and everybody in the 2 rows behind me in the golf cart. So that was one takeaway. The second was, I'm used to large stadiums filled with people. Later that day, I was in College Station where they had 108,000 people for the Alabama-Texas A&M game. The Texas and Oklahoma game was in the mid-90s. And just the scope and intensity and the proximity of the fans. The Cotton Bowl is pretty tight from sideline to sideline. The noise, the feel of the State Fair of Texas all around. I've been to some pretty special atmospheres, and that is certainly on that list. And for me that day, to go see Oklahoma and Texas, and then go see Alabama at Texas A&M, that was actually one of those really, really unique and special experiences when you're in my role that it never gets old, quite frankly.
I'm slightly concerned that the commissioner was buying his own funnel cake, but and I'll stop short of asking what funnel cake is. Although I
was rolling around with a bunch of cheap people in the golf cart, so I was the only one willing to step up. Fried dough. There's probably some new other colloquial name for it in the UK, but whatever you can imagine unhealthy, that's all carb based. I did forget to talk about the expansion of Oklahoma and Texas, so let me come back to that. I was so excited about the funnel cakes that it when I took over in 2015, in one of my first meetings, I just tried to identify for our presidents and chancellors some of the what may happens down the road. And we never assumed that certain conference membership movement, but in October of 2015 had a conversation about what if. And when the presidents for Texas and Oklahoma approached me, and they were committed to doing something together, it was never about money. That's something that was way in the background. It was about the fit, the feel, the decision making, the leadership of our conference, and both Oklahoma and Texas wanting to be a part of that. What I think it means is you've got 2 outstanding universities, like our 14 universities, committed to high-level national championship caliber college sports. We renew rivalries. You think about Missouri and Oklahoma. We're in the old Big 8 conference for decades. That's a renewal rivalry, a wrestling match that we haven't had 2 SEC teams compete in a wrestling match, and they compete under another affiliation. That'll be cool. The renewal of Arkansas and Texas, which has these legendary stories from the 60s. They were in the Southwest Conference together, again, for decades. Texas and Texas A&M kind of leads the attention, that game being restored. But there are these intersections. So Georgia and Oklahoma banded together for a lawsuit back in the 80s that changed how television opportunities are presented to football teams. And I could kind of go on and on. I actually learned more and more about some of the legendary games between our current members and our future members. And I think the restoration of those rivalries is important. And while we talk a lot about football here, our women's sports across the board will be second to none. When you look at the national championships earned and all of our future members, it's really an exciting thought on like a weekly or couple times a week basis when our teams line up for conference competition. The caliber of the competitors and the caliber of the event will be, in some ways, when you get to like a track and field or swimming and diving, it'll be an internationally elite level competition, which will be exciting to see.
That's a great point, actually. It doesn't get talked about a lot. And if Alex was here, I feel like I'm doing Alex's job for him because he's a big Texas fan. He gets a lot of stick for being a Texas football fan, but he will consistently tell you that the University of Texas is an elite level athletic institution across the board. And obviously that doesn't get talked about a lot when you talk about their move to the SEC. Well, that's huge for the conference, right?
It is. And, we during the COVID year, so usually in the U.S. women's volleyball is a fall sport. It's national championships in December. The COVID year, it became an April of 21 national championship that Kentucky won in women's volleyball. It's the first time an SEC team had won a national championship, and one of those really special moments for me because of what we had to kind of move through to make it possible for that competition to happen. That's an elevation. I think Missouri, when they came in, was at that time a top 10 program. Florida had helped lead in women's volleyball, and now you add Texas to that mix, what Texas A&M's committed. The progress that I've seen in our league. Arkansas is now in the top 10. Our volleyball competition, which in some ways had lagged for a period of time, will become elite in that same way, both because of the commitment of our current members and the addition of 2 new members that across the board are serious about competing at the highest level. That's, again, a lot of the excitement that I see for our future.
I'm curious, you talked about the Cotton Bowl game with Texas and Oklahoma, and obviously last weekend was Florida, Georgia, or Georgia, Florida, depending on which side of the fence you sit on. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that might be the only neutral venue game that there is in the SEC. How did it compare atmosphere-wise to the 2 games? Because they're relatively close together, I think.
Yeah, since 2011 or 2012, as a member, we've had Arkansas and Texas A&M playing at AT&T Stadium as well. So we've had that annual neutral site game. So the first thing is the Florida, Georgia, Florida game, just so we avoid all the traps, splits the crowd from goalpost to goalpost. So you start at one goalpost, wrap around to the next. That might be Georgia, Florida on the other side. Oklahoma and Texas game is the 50-yard line to the 50-yard line. So it's like a horseshoe in one end of the stadium that's one team's fans and horseshoe on the other for the other team's fans. So that was the first thing I noticed that was different. The other is, the Cotton Bowl is probably another 15 or 20,000 fans on top of what they put in the stadium in Jacksonville. And in Jacksonville, they actually add stands. So Jacksonville's usually away the week before the game so they can build up and increase capacity for that game above kind of the standard NFL 60 or 70, 65,000. And so I noticed those 2 things. The way the stadium was configured, 50 to 50, as opposed to goalpost, and then the size. And then in Jacksonville, you have a lot happening outside the stadium. But in Texas, you have a huge, enormous State Fair of Texas Ferris wheel. Yeah. And so that what's happening outside the stadium is its own unique reality.
Obviously, the game has to move away from Jacksonville because of the stadium renovations, and bit of talk this week about where it might end up. I know this is not your decision, right? It's between the two teams, but Kirby Smart's been fairly vocal about moving it back to being a home and away game. Do you have any kind of thoughts on how that might end up? Does it look as if it just moved to another neutral venue until it could return to Jacksonville?
Yeah, I'm an interested observer, and so from time to time I'll have updates. I think the questions around construction timing and construction planning in Jacksonville are still being answered. It is pretty special. So we've identified 3 neutral site games that provide something unique. I know that from past experience. There's a bit of fall break at the University of Georgia. There's a whole lot of people that go down to Sea Island, the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, Sunday of that weekend. So while their observations have been made, the schools are going to have to make that decision. There is something special that they have built over time in Jacksonville. I know both have an interest in respecting, even though there is likely to be some construction. That it's happened before, and they've played on campus, and they'll figure out the right venue, right circumstance if there's a need to relocate temporarily again.
Sorry, go on, George.
No,
I was going to say, you've touched on some of the outstanding events that you've been able to be a part of during your tenure so far as commissioner. What's been the highlight so far of that time as the SEC commissioner?
I'll give you just a handful. One is in the fall of 2015, walking into the new Kyle Field for the first time when Alabama played, having flown into the airport, seeing all the private planes, and then the level of noise that day. It's one of the few times where I've had to make sure I breathe slowly, just given the overwhelming nature of that moment. And I've always appreciated going back to that game at that time just to remember what that was like for me, my first fall as the conference commissioner. I mentioned earlier Kentucky winning the national championship in women's volleyball. People wouldn't believe that, but for all we had to do to give the opportunity for young people to compete, to complete their education through COVID in really difficult circumstances, there's probably not a lot of firsts that I can achieve as commissioner, but the first time an SEC team had won a national championship in women's volleyball, that was pretty cool. The national championship stage in football, the conversations I'm able to have with the head coach each time, I always will say something about, hey, what's tomorrow, or something about the game. One of the things that's a privilege for me is I come to know coaches and our leaders in our athletic programs as people. Most people see them on a TV screen about 4 inches tall or 16 inches tall, depending on how big the screen is, or they're in a stadium, 50 yards away or up in the upper deck. And I get to have conversations with them. They ask me questions. I ask them questions. I get to watch and learn from them. And that's a great reward, a great privilege. And, literally, I kind of kidded about being in Killarney and bumping into some LSU fans, taking pictures with them, being in a pub in Dublin, seeing a former student athlete. Those are special experiences as well.
Well, we can't count buying funnel cake as a perk. But what's the greatest perk about being the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference?
I probably gave it away out of order, and that is the ability to come to know coaches, in particular, student athletes, as people. That we have agreements, a lot of agreements. We have disagreements. We see things differently from time to time. To see the motivation, the fire that burns inside them, to learn from Billy Donovan, who is Florida's basketball coach, won back-to-back national championships, and then talk to him one-on-one about what was that like. You spend your career trying to ascend the mountaintop, and how did that change you? To watch one time, Nick Saban called me about a week after in 2012. His team had won the national championship. They beat Notre Dame, and he was going to ask me a question. I was not yet the commissioner, and I kind of interrupted and said, Nick, congratulations on your team's performance and winning the national championship. And there wasn't like a thank you, or, really proud. It was kind of a moment, and then we were right back in, and there was this learning of how quickly the page gets turned. George, I've been on the stage, as I mentioned, with coaches, and I've asked them, what's on your schedule tomorrow? Because I think it's always important to think ahead. Coaches don't want to jinx the moment. But I'll have conversations that are like, hey, at 9 a.m. I've got this, at 11 a.m. I've got this meeting. I'm thinking about scholarship renewals, people making NFL draft decisions or Major League Baseball draft opportunities. Most exciting game I've ever attended was Oklahoma and Georgia in the Rose Bowl. That was after the 2018 season, if my memory's right. Went to double overtime, actually. Baker Mayfield was playing for Oklahoma. Never envisioned the future is being in the same conference, but the ups and downs of that game. What I remember, though, is on that trophy stage, man, it's the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all. And Kirby and his staff had a plan because they had to fly back across the country. They had 7 days to prepare for the national championship game that was played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And just the ability to see that, and that they weren't afraid to project winning. And if we succeed, what do we do next? That was one of those specific learning experiences about how you prepare to succeed. Not just prepare, but how do you prepare for outcomes? And again, that's the granddaddy of them all. You're supposed to stand there and celebrate. As soon as that trophy was presented, they were headed to the locker room, cleaning up, doing interviews, and getting on that plane to go home and get ready for the next one. That was an example of the focus that can be brought in a really disciplined structure in a positive way.
Commissioner, we're really appreciative of your time, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to finish up with you. You mentioned earlier on that there aren't many things that you can accomplish, any new things, as the commissioner of the SEC. One of the big scandals enveloping college football right now is the Michigan sign stealing scandal. And as a part of that, there's a huge call from fans, people in the media, maybe within teams as well, to just put goddamn mics in helmets. Is that something that you can see happening in the near future, short-term future, long-term, mid-distance, that you can hang your hat on as saying this is something that we achieved and we brought into college football during my tenure?
Yeah, hopefully we brought a few things. The way we do replay is one. Baseball, we actually use the type of communication you're describing with the coach, the catcher, and the pitcher on pitch calling. We've explored it at least 3 different times. We run into some helmet certification, which then creates some insurance issues. If you just put it in the helmet, the NFL obviously does that. We've had a group meeting even before to think about, are there other ways to communicate, an electronic wristband where you can dial in plays so it's not just through the audio and a helmet, maybe a waistband with some screen availability that you could look at. I think what's happened, whether it's accurate reporting or not, I mean, there's a lot to it, it seems, will accelerate the decision making. We've been a bit slow in accessing technology in the college game. We go back to the NFL, you see these big Microsoft carts that roll out every week that have tablets and sideline phones, but managing sideline communication. What the general public doesn't see is there's a lot more to it beyond just having a microphone on the sideline and a set of speakers and a helmet. And so you want to think about the design. We want to think about the game, what's happened with this sign stealing allegations relates to the integrity of the game, and how can we make it easy to use, as seamless as possible, but not allow, the NFL cuts off the audio communication with about 15 seconds to go on the play clock so that you're not giving, immediate instruction. So how do we manage all of that? I expect a number of us will propose solutions. And again, given what's happening, people will coalesce around something. And it would not surprise me that we start next year with some form of communication beyond the guys in like the yellow, red, and orange shirts waving their arms on the sidelines with pictures of ducks and Where's Waldo photos to signal plays.
As Ollie said, we are very appreciative of your time because we know that you're a busy man. You get a hectic schedule. That's all from us on this episode. It's been awesome catching up with the Commissioner. We normally ask our guests at this point what they're working on, what our listeners can watch out for. But I wanted to ask you, where are you going to be watching your football this Saturday? Are you going to be going to a game?
Yeah, I'm back on the double header streak, which are hard to do because of the way games are laid out. So I will actually begin my day in Gainesville, Florida. Arkansas is at Florida. And then return to Birmingham, as we like to say in the States. Birmingham, maybe in your region. And we'll drive over to Tuscaloosa for LSU, Alabama at night. And then I can even project out the following week. Ole Miss is at Georgia. And then we'll kind of see how those 2 weeks play out to figure out where I'll be on November 18th. But we have an incredibly exciting 4 weeks of football in our regular season leading to our national championship. So I appreciate the opportunity for the conversation. You guys have become my running partners on a regular basis as I listen to the podcast. And as I noted, appreciate Laura making the introduction indirectly and the ability to have a direct conversation, George, with you in Nashville and today on the podcast. So I'd be happy to come back at any point. You're welcome in our media days and our championship game, whenever it might work.
Oh, we would love that. We loved having you on. Thank you very much. As you know, the Commissioner joins a long list of truly awesome guests on this pod. So if you haven't already, please check out our previous episodes. And if you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe. You can also follow us on Twitter, now X, and Instagram. And again to the Commissioner and Ollie for their brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.